All right, we're going. Well, welcome everybody to our very first session of our YouTube series, Confirmation-ish. Ashley had this idea and I thought, well, let's give it a shot. Why not, right? And I'm coming at Confirmation-ish with this approach of like, we're going to cover some topics during this first season of Lent. And we're going to approach it with this idea that you may have learned this and you may have forgotten it. And so this whole thing is just going to be a refresher on Lent, and we're going to dive deep and just have some conversation. What about you, Ashley? How are you viewing Confirmation-ish?
I view it the same way as what you have just explained, but also I think it's a way for us to have a more intimate conversation as far as thoughts or feelings or things that might be going on that currently relate, that hopefully relate to kids, and all while having a whole lot of fun doing that. So yeah, that's my hope for it as well.
Awesome. And if you have noticed, Ashley and I are both wearing the color of Lent, which is purple. And I love purple because...
Don't say it. Don't even say it.
It's the color of Memorial High School.
It is Memorial High School. Yeah.
But more importantly, the Minnesota Vikings. So
oh.
I've got my Minnesota Walleye Viking t-shirt on today. Ashley's got a super cool fleecy thing going on. Woohoo! Go purple.
Go purple.
So I'd like to just ask, just maybe as a primer, a first thing for our first episode of kind of what is Lent? What is Lent all about? And we can talk about some memories, things we like and don't like about Lent. But Ashley, if you were to talk to somebody about what is Lent and they're like, what are you talking about? What is this thing? What would be like the first thing that comes to mind?
The first thing that comes to mind when I think of Lent is church more serious. And I say that because it's the time of our waiting as we journey to the cross, or our time journeying with God and with Jesus as he's moving towards all of the Holy Week activities, which is Last Supper, crucifixion, and ending with resurrection of Easter. And so when I first think of Lent, it's like much more serious because this is one of those huge foundation pieces of our faith. A lot of times I feel like some people think that Christmas is like the big Christian holiday. You know, without
Right.
Christmas, we have no Jesus. And I get that to some extent, but our whole faith is based on this resurrection that is equally, if not more, even more important. And so I think that this journey of Lent really prepares us for that resurrection and the amazingness of it. And also as I've gotten older, the seriousness of it, as far as Last Supper, like imagining eating with someone you love in your family or friend, knowing that that was going to be the last time, or watching your Jesus like die, like if you were actually there, and that someone would do that for me specifically. Like those are all things that like I think about in Lent that are such foundational pieces of our faith. What about you?
You know, I 100% agree. And I always think of how does this like church season correspond to the Bible, and what are big themes? And so you touched on one, and that's a journey and a walking with that I really think of in Lent. And historically, Lent was this time for pretty much confirmation students. It was a time of deep intentional learning about the Christian faith. And it was kicked off with Ash Wednesday. And then it was like on Easter morning, that was like the big celebration in the early Christian church, when people who were new to faith or who were confirmed were able to take communion and they were baptized and all of that sort of stuff. And it was a big celebratory thing for them in their faith journey, but also in the life of the church and celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. And so another thing I like to think about are the various journeying stories that we have in the Old Testament and the New Testament. The two easy ones to go to, because they have the same amount of days, are when the Israelites are wandering around in the wilderness right after they've left Egypt. They're in the desert for 40 years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff going on in those passages, but they're in the desert for 40 years. And then another one is when Jesus is in the desert for 40 days, more like us, going through a 40-day season of Lent. And various Gospels tell us that Jesus is tempted by Satan or the devil, and that's more of this adversarial sort of being. That's a whole other topic that we can dig into, but where Jesus is tempted. And so I wonder sometimes in Lent, like if we're being more intentional about living into who we're called to be as disciples, maybe doing a little bit more learning, maybe taking some things away and adding to our spiritual life, like how are we tempted in that? I think so often people just associate Lent with like, oh, I'm going to give up chocolate or I'm going to give up pop or something. When really like Lent can also be this way of like, how are you bettering yourself? How are you living into community? Things like that. I know somebody that I know a couple, 3-4 years ago, he did like I'm cleaning up my closet, but I'm going to donate each either an item or give to different nonprofits. And so for him, it was a way of giving back and helping his community out, whether it was through food or through clothing or through monetary gifts. He wanted to give back to the community. So he was blessing and gifting for that practice for him. But that's what I think about in Lent. Anything else to add, Ashley?
Yeah, I've as an adult, I've really liked the idea of what are you going to do versus what aren't you going to do. I mean, I know that journeying in that wilderness and wandering and the heaviness of journeying in Lent. So by giving something up, you're kind of experiencing some of that. And so I understand that aspect as well, but I also feel like sometimes because we are so busy, we're just such busy people now, that it almost becomes more of a challenge adding something that you're going to do each day, whatever that is, pray, journal, whatever, give to nonprofit or charity, like you were saying. Because I feel like sometimes that takes more thought and more intention. And then it's something that can become this habit that's like a part of you and a part of your faith journey that you can then keep carrying on moving forward. Like if I give up candy, I'm not going to give up candy my whole life. Like I love candy. I always have candy in my office. Kids always steal my candy. So like, it's much more short-term giving up, but when you're bringing in something into your life or doing something outward for others, something I think that can change you in a different way and kind of something you can hold on to in the future, a new practice, if you will. So yeah, I really have come to like that idea too, because you are, by doing something, you're sacrificing your time for something else. If I'm going to be intentional about praying, then maybe I can't watch another episode of something on TV. Like that's my intentional time. So you're still giving something up to do something really important that could become a real habit or a part of your daily life.
So you mentioned stuff that you like and don't like about this giving stuff up. Or taking something on. Are there any other things you like or don't like about Lent?
Personally, growing up, Lent was a time, like we had confirmation every single week, every single Wednesday. And so when Lent came around, and there was also no Wednesday evening worship. Like that just wasn't a thing. Like church was only a Sunday thing. At least where I grew up, a Sunday morning thing. And so when Lent came around, we got to be in the church building, like with lots of people in the evening. So I remember that being a very cool thing and also a hard thing for me at the same time. I really liked that being in the church at a different time, but having worked in a church my whole life, you know, I've been in churches in evenings before, but not necessarily to worship. And I also had other things happening. You know, I was a dancer. So as I got older, my dance was on Wednesday nights. So Wednesdays became very busy for me. It was this huge, big circle of going to dance and then coming back to church for confirmation and then going home and doing homework. But Lent was that different schedule because we did not have any confirmation classes during those days of Lent. Instead, it was, this is when we worship now. So you come and worship and had to do your sermon note and all of that kind of stuff. And so it was a nice break from like the confirmation curriculum, but we were also expected to be in church and everyone was in church. So it was the only time I could sit with my friends during church was on Wednesdays. So I really liked that, being able to sit in the very, very back. But then if there were any issues, it's like, done. Like you lost it for the rest of Lent, you know? So it was like this responsibility and rite of passage to be able to be mature enough to sit with your friends, if you will. So I remember sitting with my friends, you know, trying to do sermon notes. Like we're all like trying to talk very quietly, you know, figure out those. We had to just write 3 main points. That's how we had to do. But those are like really good memories of Lent because it was all very different. It was just a different feel and an atmosphere. And so, yeah, I love Lent. Like Lent is probably one of my favorite times in the church year for sure. I like the evening worship. It's different. Like I'm in a different headspace and a different focus. We have Wednesday night worship at Trinity, so I see all these families and kids, and it's crazy like every Wednesday. But Wednesday evenings during Lent, it's different. You know, we have extra families there, and even the kids with their families. Like it's just different, you know. Yep. Different ambiance and feel. And
I'm the same way. When I was growing up, my congregation only had evening worship on Wednesdays during Advent and during Lent. So it was so it was very special to be able to go and worship. I had confirmation at like 4:15. So like right after I had a 15-minute break and then it was worship. So it was really special to get dropped off, do confirmation, and then my family would come and worship, then we go home and eat dinner. But it was a great way for us to be together as a family and enjoy great music. And I couldn't remember any of the messages, but that feeling that you're talking about of being in a different headspace and a little more serious than the usual church service that may have a few jokes in the sermon or some lightheartedness. This was a time to just breathe and be intentional about being present and focusing on discipleship. So I do like Lent too, but I'm also like a tangible person and a visual person. So I always look for like things in the worship center that are different. And as I've gone through ministry and in seminary and internships and first call, one thing just always sticks out to me in Lent, and that's the smell of soup cooking. Almost everywhere I've gone, there's a soup supper or a soup lunch. And so I smell soup, and I've got a crock pot over here with soup going. So part of that Lent thing for me is the sensory experience of soup cooking, which warms me up and is comfort food for me. And so Lent also takes on this comforting thing of tending to myself to nourish me into the summer and after Easter when I'm so busy with vacation and family. And this is like a workout for the soul during Lent. So I can keep going on.
It's funny you say that about soup because I too have that memory. Not that I ate soup because I was dancing, but walking in, it had a different smell. Yeah, church is definitely that different smell for sure. Yeah, I totally remember that.
And it's almost like this, like have maybe I don't know, but like you go home like to your parents' house, Ashley, and if there's like cookies baking or there are some things that just make you feel welcome and at home.
Yeah.
And for me, like growing up, like it would be cookies or something great in the oven cooking. And so
Yeah.
to have that experience at church to me is like, oh, I can let down my guard a little bit and just be real.
Yeah, I also remember driving home. You know, we would always have church conversations on the drive home, and always being in church clothes and super sunny, like reflecting off the snow and not being able to like see because it was so bright. And so I remember having those church conversations driving home in the dark or when it's sure. And so that was different also. And one of those rite of passage things I remembered, I just had to write it down so I didn't forget. Lent was the one and only time that we were ever allowed to wear jeans to church, because I would go straight from school to dance to church. And so like whatever I wore to school is just what I had to wear to church. And so, yeah, no one, when I went to church, no one really in our church wore jeans. I mean, that's just really not a big deal now. Remember it being a really big deal. Dressing up on a Sunday as that sign of respect for the church, and that you're there listening and as a participant, and it's important. Kind of similar reasons like you dress up when you go to a funeral, and that same idea, you know, it's this respect and honoring and stuff. So I remember Lent being able to wear jeans and having a different sense of comfort sitting in a pew in comfortable clothes, you know, and that not until you said that about the soup and the surroundings and involving all your senses that was really a part of that for me, you know, like being able to feel comfortable in church, being dressed up, being able to feel comfortable in church in my everyday clothes, being not the church girl going to church on a Sunday, but me, the sinful me, the person who screws up and who've made mistakes, you know, like going in your jeans just felt, for me, it felt like I was a part of that process of Lent, that journey we've been talking about that's heavy and not very pretty and all of that. As an adult looking back at that, being in my jeans and comfort like that as my true self of what I'm typically like every day is something that like I can still feel what that was like sitting in church. Yeah.
So it's interesting you talk about that difference in feeling, and I think Ash Wednesday, which kicks off Lent, helps remind us just kind of, you know, we might feel like we're on top of the world all the time, but Lent, you know, helps humble us a little. And Ash Wednesday has this really funky way of reminding us that we're mortal and that we are not perfect. And so I don't have any ashes with me, but I've got some baking cocoa powder. Ashley's got name brand. I've got festival version. So Ashley, let's put some crosses on our head. And
do I have to like lick my finger first, or will it just
maybe?
I just think that'd be gross. I don't want to put a licked finger in here. Oh, there it goes. It's sticking out.
I'm gonna do it.
No, gross! No!
I'll do a different finger. That's
Okay.
my family stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's fine. I'm germs. You can't do that. Okay.
Oh, I got a good one. But I don't want to be, oh gosh, there's cocoa powder everywhere.
I'm not doing as good as you. You have way more
I
practice.
don't like your finger.
I didn't lick my finger. No, I can't. I'd have to throw it away.
Look at that. I got a good cross.
Mine's bad. But you know what? I'm going to leave it bad because no two crosses are the same. Like when you go on Ash Wednesday, no two crosses are the same. You have the perfect cross on your head. You have the super like thick cross on my head. You sometimes get the smudge. And for me, I'd always have my forehead itches. And then I would
Oh,
itch as a kid. And so then I'd have just black speckles all over my forehead. Um, but it's funny, like I remember looking, you'd go back from the pew and like you're looking to see like what everyone's cross looks like. And then you can't see your own because, this was pre-cell phone days. I know I'm that old. So you couldn't see it. So I remember church being done and then going to the bathroom or looking in the rear view mirror, like trying to see what my cross looked like or when I got home. And there was something about seeing what your cross looked like that year. That was kind of exciting. I don't know.
yeah.
Mine is like massively big this time.
So the words, and I'm totally blanking right now on the exact phrasing, but when you get the cross put on your forehead, it's just remember you are dust, and to dust you will return. And so I think that's recalling that the creation story where God forms humanity out of dust and muck and mud and blows life into us,
Yeah.
and then that ultimately we are mortal, our bodies will perish, and whether you're cremated or not, like bodies dissolve back into the earth, but it's that breath of life of God in us. It's who we are inside that lives on in the resurrection. And Ash Wednesday is a humbling worship experience for me because everything I try to earn and do here on earth, it's eventually it's going to be for naught. Like, the soup that I'm going to make, like I put a lot of effort and energy into that. I mean, ultimately it's just a pot of soup. All the things I try to earn and strive for, they're just going to fall away eventually. But it's, participating and working on your discipleship and how you live into God's kingdom is what matters.
Mm-hmm. And, thinking of remembering that we're dust and to dust we shall return, it's not only humbling, but it's like uplifting in a way that we've been given this promise. That's started, that's how we will end. And because of the resurrection, like we get to be in heaven and with Jesus and everything, whatever that is like, and so like it's humbling and inspirational to me, like all wrapped in one. And so sometimes I have a hard time trying to understand my feeling around that because it's both of those things. And I think the hardest part is my hardest Ash Wednesdays have been when mortality is at the forefront of my mind. And so I don't have permission to share, but I will for the benefit of everyone watching here. So Dad, I asked for forgiveness. Didn't want me to share this, but I think it's really important. As many of you know, like my hardest Ash Wednesday was a couple years ago when my dad was battling cancer. And so, I mean, thankfully he is healed and he is doing great and amazing. But that Ash Wednesday was very hard, not only for myself and my dad independently, but it was even more hard for me, like watching my dad go through that process of hearing those words. We're not big criers in church. Well, my mom and I are, but my dad isn't. But I remember my dad coming back after getting ashes with tears in his eyes. And he went to the 12:15 worship service. So my mom was working. It was just my dad and I who were at that service. But it's that realization that human life is very fragile. And we're not guaranteed more than the day we're given and the day we have. And so those Ash Wednesdays, or the first Ash Wednesday after losing my grandparents and things like that, like when mortality is right in front of you and you're in the midst of that being a true reality in that moment, or having been a true reality in a moment before, it's really hard to walk through an Ash Wednesday hearing those words But again, using that as a humbling experience in order to focus on that promise. Like my dad's cancer easily could have gone the other way. Thank God it didn't. But it does for a lot of other people. And I know it being hard, like other people I know who are struggling currently or who didn't make it, like that's really hard. It's really hard to know that they're struggling with that, or that they did struggle with that, and then yet celebrate that we are all human and my dad's okay in this moment. It's hard to process, and I think it's really hard for me to process as an adult. And so I think for youth, it's even more hard to process and understand, because some youth watching this, like you may have lost all your grandparents, you may have lost a parent, a best friend, or you may have lost no one, and you don't really have that personal experience. And death, unfortunately, is something that every human eventually experiences. And so I think Ash Wednesday is a good reminder for all of us that our lives matter. We're here to make a difference, and we're here to do good, but not forgetting where we came from, and not forgetting whose we are. Like we're, not ever forgetting that, and that no matter what happens, we get to be with God, and we are forever blessed in that.
And I think in a year of pandemic, so much has metaphorically died, like as far as our way of life. And so I think you're spot on when you say, like, we are like all going through some grief, and it may not be the death of a loved one, but normalcy. I mean, right now, I can't imagine not wearing a mask for the next, I don't know, year or two, maybe especially during a cold season. But, a lot of what life used to be is no longer. And so I think God's always working about resurrection and new life. And I'm looking forward to being in community in person with you all eventually. But we gotta play it safe at the moment. All right, we've been talking for some time, so let's wrap this up. Ashley, I'd like to thank you for season 1, episode 1 in the books here. I thank you all for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week for episode number 2. And we're going to keep talking about Lent, and we're going to probably dig deeper into some a Bible passage or two, and talk about how that connects with Trinity's theme this year of God's promises for you. All right, peace out, everybody.